Welcome to our Google Plus Hangout, celebrating 125 years of exploration.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm your host, Andrew Howley, here from National Geographic. I'm joined by three great explorers and one very lucky participant who sent in a question in advance as we explore the world of exploration and the constructive role that failure can have in it. As you know, we've been celebrating all year the 125th anniversary of the National Geographic Society, and it gave us lots of opportunities to talk about the spectacular successes and amazing discoveries and thrilling adventures that everybody's had. But anybody who's ever attempted any of these things knows that that's always the last part of the story, that there's many great challenges and some huge and colossal and wonderful failures along the way. So our explorers with us today have made amazing discoveries and accomplished incredible things in their long and short careers. And we're going to explore some of the things that happened to them along the way that they might not have expected, but still learned a lot from. So joining us first, we have Agustin Fuentes. Agustin, there is a primatologist who has studied most recently some macaques, and he straps critter cams on them, and we have wonderful videos that you can see of the macaques and the world that they live in. And he had a wonderful expedition where he was out in the jungles of Borneo, and you know, as an explorer does, started exploring maybe a little bit too much and got terribly lost. So we'll hear about that story from him. We have Jill Heinert, who is a cave diver and has had some incredible experiences down deep under the water, under the earth, in some of the most dangerous and beautiful places on Earth. A few years ago, she set out to explore some of the least explored of these places where you would least expect to find underwater diving, and that's in the middle of the desert. So following the footsteps of Alexander the Great, she headed out into the deserts of Egypt and came up dry. Is that a good way of putting it? And we'll hear about those adventures. And Paul Racy, here coming to us from the UK, has had a long and distinguished career, has species named after him, and species he's discovered, and incredible adventures that he has had, and one thorn in his side for nearly a decade while studying sucker-footed bats and the many, many males that they have found. They've never quite been able to find a female. And Paul, I don't know if you know any better than the rest of us as to why that is, but maybe that's one of the first stories we can dive into. And then our public participant here is Sophie Steer. She's coming to us from Pennsylvania. You can see some of her wonderful art behind her there. Sophie's a medical illustrator and science illustrator. So you can wave Sophie and say hello to everybody. And she'll be joining us and jumping in on the conversation. But I think, Paul, I'd like to start with you and see what can you tell us about what your thoughts were going into the experience searching for these bats, and how you came to think about it.
It just started off as any sort of study on an unknown species of bat. Very little is known about Malagasy bats. We found a particularly interesting one, the endemic sucker-footed bat. It has these strange sucker-like things on its wrists and ankles. We wanted to know more about it. So we started off any sort of study on the species. And after 7 years, we'd caught 300 individuals. We'd had nearly 900 captures of those 300 individuals because we recaptured several a few times, and we haven't caught a female. And it's extremely embarrassing. And it's also inexplicable. And I don't know what to do about it. The fact that little boys join the adult males in our study area twice a year means that their mothers can't be far away. And I guess that's the most tantalizing thing, that the little boys that join the adults, we know they're juveniles because we can hold up their wings to the light and we can see a bit of light through the cartilage in their wing bones, which means they haven't fully formed. Now, juvenile bats don't migrate long distances. Their wings aren't up to it. So they haven't come far. but they've come out of range of their mothers so far as we're concerned. And we've had a few side trips to try and find the mothers, and we have failed.
So, Sophia, your question, I believe one of your first questions was for Paul, if you want to lay into that.
Yeah, you know they're procreating. You know they have to be there somewhere, or at least you think, because the last time you saw a mother bat was 30 years ago. So I was wondering, could they do anything like the flatworm or the clownfish and change gender?
Very interesting question, and I have to say, Sophie, it's crossed my mind, but that would be a first for mammals.
Yes, it would.
That would be a first for mammals, and from everything we know about mammalian reproductive biology, which is my sort of basic discipline, I think that is most unlikely. Most unlikely. I mean, it's got to the. I said I was a mammalian reproductive biologist. It's got to this state now where people are saying to me, "Racy, are you sure you're sexing them properly?" And you know that's really kind of hard to take.
Yeah.
You know, because it's pretty obvious when you've got a male for all the obvious reasons, and you can even push the testes around under the skin. So you know what you know what you're dealing with, and they're all males.
So Paul, I could see this being a big challenge for you and very surprising the first season or the second season, maybe the third season that you guys had been out there. How did your interpretation of the experience and the sense of the challenge and the failure change over the years as this mystery developed?
Well, I thought there has to be an easy explanation. Maybe the males are in this valley and the females are in adjacent valleys because the young males aren't going so far. So we went back to National Geographic and said, look, we need more support to have these expeditions to adjacent valleys, and we did that. And we found it very difficult to catch bats in adjacent valleys, and we found no females. So it's still an open question. I don't think they're far away, but Madagascar is it's very difficult terrain to move over, particularly when you need quite a lot of equipment with you. You need camping gear and all that sort of stuff. I mean, if there's not a track, you're going to find it very difficult to get there.
Yeah.
So we could drive a certain way. Then we had to hire porters and baggage carriers and to get us to our destination, and you can see them now. And it didn't work out. I mean, it's tantalizing because if you go back over the museum collections. And in the Smithsonian collection in Washington and the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, you can find females in those collections. So 8 out of 23 Mysopoda, suckerfooter bats, in those collections since 1948. Collected since 1948 are females. So there are 8 females in those museum collections, and 3 of those are from the river valley where we were working, and 1 from the village where we were working. So that's really even more tantalizing. But so why couldn't we find them? I mean, other people found them. I mean, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. So those would be
1948 was the first capture. Was the first female. 1948.
So the people who collected those specimens are not out there looking anymore. They're
not out there looking anymore.
You can find some cottage somewhere.
No.
Okay. That's fascinating.
Stymied,
so
stymied by the mysteries of a woman.
That kind of answers one of the questions that we've had sent in from Akshay Ramreka from Kuala Lumpur, and he was wondering about when you do run into a lack of success in the field, does Nat Geo reissue the failed assignments, or are they completely abandoned? And I guess Paul, your story for one shows if you could say that you've got a new clue, you can get the funding. People want to answer these mysteries. It's not like, we thought we would figure it out, but nope, we run up against the brick wall, so we're cutting and running. Do you think that that's one of the driving things in science still? I guess, Jill and Augustine, all of you could jump in on this. Is there a good sense of kind of excitement when people meet failure because of the new opportunities that it presents?
If you're not willing to fail, then you're not exploring. You can spend your entire life in front of a television set like a lump of meat with a remote control in your hand, and you'll never fail at anything. So you have to be willing to embrace that, to learn clues and have discovery opportunities.
I mean, the whole point of doing science is really failure. That's how we learn. There's so few actual successes that it's going out and trying and demonstrating that it's not this, but it might be something else. That's basically how we gain knowledge.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
It's always there's always new information. Even if something goes wrong and you don't find what you were looking for, you've kind of answered a question there.
Yeah.
And it may lead you in a completely different direction, too.
So what about you, Jill? You're out there in the desert looking for water, as people have done many times, generally in comics and cartoons, but most people try to avoid the adventure. But what did you find, when you went out there and didn't find the waters? How did that shape your new search?
Well, we were following a very old lead from Alexander the Great, who was drawn to travel across the desert to this incredible oasis called Siwa to consult with an oracle, and an oracle was inside the temple. And when I read that this oracle was a spring and that Alexander thought that these oasis springs were connected beneath the desert, to me that was crying cave exploration. And so my colleagues and I went out to consult the oracle. And when we got to the temple and the actual well where Alexander had his moment, I shimmied through some little bars and then climbed down the shaft of this well to this incredible, beautiful, clear spring water, fresh water, welling up out of the ground. But the entire well had collapsed in, and there was rocks blocking everything, so there wasn't a chance for me to fit my little body down into these networks. So we traveled elsewhere in the desert to these other oases to try and find out how the water system worked in the western desert. And unfortunately, it was during the Arab Spring, which made any efforts at exploration extremely challenging and fraught with dangers along the way.
Wow. So, that brings up some new unexpected dangers that came into that situation for you. But we actually have someone from Cairo wrote in on Facebook and asked the question, is it even safe to explore underwater caves to start with? It seems like you're kind of asking for trouble.
Well, cave diving is sort of known as one of the most dangerous sports that people can take on. If you have the appropriate training and the right equipment, then you can certainly mitigate a lot of the risks. But I think one of the key things is to understand when to call it a day, when to accept failure and come back another day. And so you have to be willing to get within, just an inch of reaching out and grabbing what you think is success or the treasure or whatever, and saying, not today. I need to call the dive, go home, and take another stab at it at another time, maybe in a different way.
Okay. So where are you at now on your search for these underwater caves in the desert?
Oh, wow. Well, I do travel all around the world exploring and documenting underwater caves. I would really like to go back and do some further exploration in the area, maybe when political things calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
But that whole area of the western desert sits on top of the greatest fossil aquifer on the planet. There is water welling out of the ground. And I think my exploration led me perhaps in a different direction. And I think what is there is this unbelievable water story that really complements a lot of the other work that I do on conservation and outreach efforts.
That's fantastic. So sometimes you'll not find what you were looking for, but find other things entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Augustine, that kind of makes me think of your story.
Well, you think about it, the story we were talking about is I got lost in the jungle looking for a monkey I was supposed to study and was actually helped out of the jungle by an orangutan who came down, got me, and walked me back into camp, which is pretty impressive. But the punchline here is that early in my career, I wanted to study those things on the edge. sort of really explore the hidden things, the last remaining members of a species or something like that. And what I came up with, it was really a lesson. I failed in the sense of my experience in Borneo, because I went to study this sort of really amazing monkey called Presbytus rubicunda, and the only time I ever saw them, they were like this. and not running around in the trees. So it turns out my experience there, plus the orangutan, who had been an old pet who was rehabilitated to live in the jungle, gave me the hint that, you know what, maybe what you should be looking at is not these last few things living out there, but those primates that do okay with people, that actually do really well around people. And that drove me to the last 10 years or so looking at macaque monkeys who do really well around humans. And so I went from a failure trying to find the last few things out there to a lot of successes asking the question, well, what, given how much humans mess with the world, which other things out there are able to exploit our messed up world?
That's excellent. And I love that because, I mean, I've known your stories here at National Geographic for the last few years, and I didn't know that this is the actual origin of it. So
yeah.
Getting lost, and the thing that you find was then like your mission for the next 10 years.
Well, it's that whole thing that we think of exploration so frequently as something that's totally out there and away from people, when it turns out some of the most interesting things in the world today are how does the world get along with people? Because we're not going away, we just keep expanding. And I'm really interested in those other animals that do well around us.
Yeah. So that's a lot like Deep Chaudhary's question from New Delhi. He sent this in on Google+, and he was wondering if any of you had ever explored or discovered something while taking a casual stroll, or that you didn't mean to find. So I don't know if you could call getting lost in the Borneo jungle a casual stroll, but
it didn't
for someone in your line of work.
It was walking through the jungle, so I thought I knew where I was going, and this was another important lesson. This was early on in my career, and so I had compass. Now we have GPS units and all of that. It wouldn't be the same. I followed a map, and I followed sort of the rule of the road, and it turns out in jungles, that doesn't work so well. In jungles, you have to feel your way, and that orangutan taught me something. Jungles aren't about the ground. Jungles are about the trees, and so understanding how things move around in the trees and sort of live on a three-dimensional reality was a lot better than the two-dimensional. So one last thing, I also noticed that even though you're looking at the trees, you do have to look at the ground a little bit. In that story, I came across this clearing when I was lost that was shimmering blue, and with all these butterflies, gorgeous, thousands of butterflies in this clearing. And I walked into them to see how it was, and as they all flew up, I realized why they were there. I was standing in a gigantic pool of pig feces.
Oh.
They feed on the feces.
So your discovery came from following a monkey. My first cave I found following cows into the jungle and ended up diving into the place where they were all drinking and also crapping too.
I don't think I'm ever going to look at that, classic image of like Bambi and the little butterfly comes and lands on his tail, and it's just the sweetest little scene you've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have a much more robust
That kills it.
sense of the full story there.
And
So
who would
Paul,
know that?
I would think
Oh, go ahead.
getting down into the caves and being amongst bats, I'm sure you've come across some really unsavory environments.
Is that me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Augustine was talking about the butterflies that when they flew away revealed the pool of pig feces that they had alighted upon, and it just made me think of what kinds of unsavory things you may have stumbled upon inadvertently deep in the caves looking for bats.
Me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I haven't found anything. I've always been frightened of finding snakes in caves, but that's never happened. And I've never found anything that's caused me any alarm. I did enter caves from the sea once on the Kenya coast with the excursion of an international bat conference that went down from Nairobi to Mombasa and then along the coast. We all were told that there was interesting bats in the caves. We all stripped off in our costumes, went into the cave, and the bats erupted and landed on all over our bodies. And, you know, there was very little panic because we knew that if we didn't grab them, it would all be all right. They would get fed up with hanging on our bodies and they'd go off somewhere else. And so that's what happened. And these bats were some of the African bats with the largest teeth. Some people were very nervous of this, I must say, but nobody got bitten.
Mariana Nikolova from Sweden had a question for us on Google Plus that ties right into this. She was wondering, how do you adventurers bite your fears during these failures? How do you have the inner fortitude when bats land all up and down you to just stand and say, "Oh, I'm sure they'll just get tired and fly away"? You know, what does that take? How do you conquer your fear in such a tough situation?
Well, there's no real fear because you know enough about bats to know what's okay and what's not okay. Mm-hmm. So long as you don't grab them. If you grab them, they'll bite you. I mean, you've learned that as an apprentice researcher that you need gloves of a certain thickness to protect your fingers. And if you don't have them, the bats' canines will go straight through them. So as long as you don't grab them, they're okay. Like most animals. I mean, bees won't sting you if you don't grab them. You know, snakes won't bite you if you don't grab them, or don't impact them in some way.
Yeah.
In general.
That's part of the whole lesson, I think, of failure is that you learn from it and build from it. And especially working in forested areas or far places, it's the repeated experience of small failures that you get larger successes. You know, how do you deal with mosquitoes? Well, you don't pay enough attention to them early on and you get covered with hundreds and hundreds of bites and you slowly learn. How do you deal with snakes? You have some close calls. And luckily, if things work out okay, you realize what not to do. How do you not get lost in the jungle? Take your time, learn your maps, and nowadays buy a GPS unit.
I think, I mean, for me, because the project in Madagascar was actually my last research project. So I really, in that respect, do feel a sense of failure. And it gripes a bit to go, to finish my career on a low, i.e. not achieving what I wanted to achieve. But I don't feel too badly about it because I know someone's going to come along and find these females. It has to happen because, the species continues. So, the females have to be there and someone else is going to find them. Someone found them in the past, not too many of them. And not on a ratio of one female to one male, as you might expect, but females were found in the past, and females are going to be found in the future. And I just hope I'm still around to read about it.
And what do you think about the whole story of exploration? Then I think there's two sides that go on. If it was just a matter of collecting facts about the world, there's lots of facts that we have that we don't know of. You can open up the encyclopedia and see lots of things that you never knew about. And you've learned these new facts, but there was no real adventure in discovering it for you because you just read it out of a book of someone else's adventure. When you guys go out there, how much of the excitement for you is also the sense of really not knowing if you're going to find the facts? You're not going to just open up to a page and have the answer.
But
how much of that is what drives you?
That's the best part. The questions are the most exciting part.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where all the discovery happens, and the opportunity to find something that nobody's ever seen before or discover a new place is incredible. But it requires that you, and this comes back to our last question, it requires that you push the envelope, and pushing the envelope often means embracing fear, whether it's fear of personal harm or whether it's fear of failure. There has to be a certain acceptance. That fear is your self-preservation, but it's also what pushes you forward in discovery.
Yeah. This is great. So thanks everybody for joining us. Everybody who's watching there, these are our explorers talking about failure and the role that it can play in the successes of exploration. If you have any questions, just hashtag them Let's Explore on Twitter, Google+, wherever you are, and we'll be watching those questions. We have one that's come in from Jason S. in Minnesota saying, how many of your first-time explorers injure themselves during their first field engagement?
That's a really... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I did. I mean, the closest I came to losing my life was in a cave. where I was helping a student to mark the eggs in a cave swiftless nest high up in a boulder cave. We were trying to get a cave ladder up, and we needed a rope. I said, I can get the rope. He said, no, I'll jump. I said, don't jump. He jumped, and the roof fell in. And rocks came very close to my head and it fell away. One landed on my foot. If that rock had landed on my head, I wouldn't be talking to you now. That was the closest I've come. And when I look back on it now, I'm much more scared about it than I was at the time.
I think that's a very common story. Many of us have had that. In my dissertation research, I was cutting trails, and I took a trail up one end near in the jungle near this stream because it was, I thought, a better view. 2 or 3 days later, I'm walking that trail during a heavy rainstorm, and I realized this whole hillside was made of clay. So me and the hillside went down all the way to the stream. I was carrying a machete with me, flew back, lost everything. I hit the ground down at the bottom and saw the machete falling down towards me. It hit my shoulder with the handle end.
Oh, wow. My closest call was actually on my first National Geographic project. It was the Ice Island project back in 2000 when we went to cave dive inside of the largest moving object on the planet, which was a huge iceberg in Antarctica. And under the pressure of intense current, we were trapped inside this cave trying to get out. And mere hours after we finally escaped this iceberg, cold and practically hypothermic, the whole thing exploded just like an ice cube when you drop it in a glass.
Wow. So what do you do in that situation, Jill?
Well, I mean, for the time that we were actually pinned inside the iceberg, it was just, you make the next best decision you can. You take the emotion of what's happening and you tuck it back in your back of your head and say, there'll be plenty of time for crying later, but right now just make the best practical next step you can, and you just work towards survival. When the iceberg itself exploded, to me that was a message that it was time to go home. And at the time on that expedition, we sort of felt it was failure because we hadn't fully explored this new ecosystem that we'd found. But in retrospect, what happened was the story, and a lot of incredible science came from that project.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Mastermind on Google Plus from New Jersey has a question for you, Jill. He says, what happens if you get lost in those underwater caves? So you're out in the icebergs, the thing explodes, you're able to get in the ship and get out of there. If you get lost in a cave, what happens?
You would die. You would not be coming home. One of the things that we train people in when we teach them to cave dive is how to use a guideline. So we use a spool of line that we take with us through the environment, and we leave this tactile reference because sometimes, well, most of the time, when you're exploring a new cave, your movement through the cave or your bubbles on the ceiling will completely blitz the visibility so that you cannot see a thing on the way out. And so you just put your hand, on this guideline, and you use it as the tactile reference to bring you home. So getting lost is just simply not an option.
Wow. Wow. So we've got a lot of great questions coming in now. We're in our kind of final moments. We'll have a few more minutes to talk to our explorers here about failure and the constructive role that it can play in exploration. But I want to get back to Sophia, our public participant, who kind of kicked us off with questions for Paul, and see what you've been thinking about this and what other questions have come to your mind.
Actually, one of the questions that I just got on my phone from an elementary girl, she wanted to know, Jill, how do you go about handling all the different cultures? Especially, she said, in Siwa, the culture is very strict. So as a woman, how do you dive and honor their cultures at the same time?
Oh, that's so important. I did a lot of research ahead of time and talked to people about how I should be appropriately dressed and how I should behave as an expedition leader and interacting with men in that part of the world. And so it's really important to understand and embrace the cultures and be very apologetic and not be afraid to ask. how it is appropriate to behave as a woman. It's challenging.
One of the most common fails that explorers have is the cultural fail, showing up somewhere and making some huge gaffy or mistake by not having done enough research as to where they're going and how the people live there.
That's crazy. Have you ever been denied a place, like because just of their culture? Have you ever been denied access?
I've had some challenges as a woman. I've been told there is no place for you here, and been denied a visa to travel because I was a woman. So yeah, there's a lot of additional challenges, but it's always worth trying.
She says, her name is Cynthia. She says she's not going to have that problem because she's going to the new pink planet. She's going to go to the new pink planet that they discovered. So she won't have that problem.
You better get going. I think it's going to take a while to get there.
Yes.
Excellent. Go for it, Cynthia.
Well,
That's how it all started for me. Yeah.
That's great. Paul, we've gotten another kind of an inspiration question for you, which they're wondering about these bats and how unusual this might be. Let me get the guy's name here. It's Tom Simmons. He came to us on Google Plus from Santa Barbara, California. He's wondering for Paul, has this been seen in any other bat species, or maybe even any other mammal species where they've had trouble finding one sex or the other?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the answer is no, not in any other bat species or any other mammal species. You do get some degree of segregation, like in all the bats in the UK and probably in North America too. I think that during the summer, females like to go in one place to have their young and suckle their young, and males go somewhere else. So you have maternity colonies and bachelor colonies and stuff like that. But that's just for part of the year, and they get together at mating time and they hibernate together in caves. So that's well documented. That's just temporary segregation. But this is absolute segregation over a 7-year period, and not one member of the opposite sex being found. I mean, that is extreme for bats. I mean, it's unheard of for bats, and I think it's unheard of for mammals. Such extreme segregation.
Yeah.
Really weird.
Would there be any possibility that there's kind of a generational thing, like they have a crop of female children in the 40s, and they kind of go off and kind of sire a few generations, and like 20 years later is the next time that there's more females?
No, I think that's most unlikely, and I mean these bats obviously haven't been reading the right textbooks because they're not behaving like they should do,
All right. So, Sophia, I want to give you one last chance to get some questions out here for our explorers, and again, encourage you guys, Augustine, Jill, Paul, anything else that you're wondering from each other. It's been so great to have you all on here. It's been a really fun conversation.
I was kind of thinking the same way you were, Andrew. I was like, is there like a harem effect going on with the bats where there's like, several females maybe higher up in the tree or something, and they only need one bat, so all the other males are like, living lower in the tree?
No, because they roost, all the bats roost in a single semi-unfurled leaf of the traveler's tree. So it looks a bit like an unfurled banana leaf. And you get up to 50 bats in one leaf, and then as the leaf unfurls, the bats must go away and find another leaf to get some shelter. And we can capture all the bats in a leaf. We just put a big bag over the leaf and then check all the bats inside the leaf, and they're all males. So there's no other roosting possibility in this particular tree, and they don't roost anywhere else. They don't roost in banana. We haven't found them in caves, and because they have these sucker feet, they're adapted to this particular smooth, shiny leaf. They can the suckers don't actually suck. They work by wet adhesion.
Right.
So like you stick a bit of wet paper to a window, it sticks. They just walk up the leaf like that, and you get up to 50 living together, and they're all males. And twice a year, they got some little boys with them too. There's no roosting opportunity for females in that study area, which is about 4 square kilometers, and they're found only in this particular tree. The traveler's tree, Ravenala, is characteristic of degraded forest. It's only found there in degraded forests. So they're not short of habitat. There's plenty of degraded forest in Madagascar, and there are plenty of these trees for them to roost in.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I know that you said, you know, it would be nice to end your career with the final discovery. I think it's even better to have such a great mystery going on. I love the sense of drama here. It's so fantastic.
Thank you, Andrew. That was the really right thing to say.
All right, so we've got one last question. I think I'll throw it to you, Augustine. Nicholas Alvarado on Google Plus had a question from Sarasota. And he's wondering, how do you see technology affecting your specific area of expertise? And how could technology mitigate or even eliminate the risk of failure? Would that be possible?
Oh, yeah, there are 2 really quick ways I could say. One was having a GPS, I wouldn't have gotten lost, a modern one. So that would have helped, but that was before they were available. But most fascinatingly, what I'm doing now is with a very broad team and great support from National Geographic and the Wave Foundation, is we're putting cameras and critter cams and GPS collars on macaque monkeys, so that all these times we thought we were losing them, we're now getting sort of satellite fixes as to where they are. So we can sit back, not bother them, aside from putting the collars on them, let them roam around and figure out where they are. And we've learned an enormous amount. All of these things we thought we knew about how macaque monkeys move around cities and jungles and temples, well, it turns out they're doing at least 50% more than we thought. And it's all because of modern technology. 10 years ago, this would have been impossible. And 10 years from now, I think the best field workers, the real explorers, are going to be the monkeys, and they'll just be providing the information to us.
Guys like you won't have to ride down a mudslide with a machete chasing you.
I'll go for that. That'll be cool.
Yeah. Oh, technology is expanding the bounds of exploration exponentially. It's unbelievable. There's a device that I used and piloted in a project back in '98 that was a Nat Geo adventure, and that mapping device developed by Dr. Bill Stone is now going to head out to eventually Jupiter's moon Europa to explore oceans underneath frozen seas. So technology has such a huge factor in expanding what's possible and allowing us an opportunity to fail bigger.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that is important, though, is it's always people operating technology. So you're never going to get rid of the person, because technology can only do what we tell it to do. It's not going to do anything new.
True. Yeah,
so
except
we're still the ones that have the major impact.
Yeah, yeah. That darn mapper, though, is going to go to Europa without a cave diver attached to it, unfortunately.
Miniaturization of the things that Augustine was talking about has been a huge step forward for bats. I mean, we put radio tags on the 10-gram Mysopoda, and now there are GPS tags we can put on fruit bats that are becoming smaller all the time, so we can put them on smaller and smaller bats. So that's been a huge step forward. And you learn, as Augustine said, you learn new things all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This has been a very enjoyable and enlightening conversation about failure and exploration, and definitely had opened up my eyes to the thrill that can be on the least expected adventures that you have. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on Google Plus and YouTube and on Twitter. Great questions. You can continue the conversation on Google Plus with us. Stay tuned and follow Nat Geo on Google Plus for more Hangouts on air. Thank you, Sophia, for joining us, and everybody that's sending her questions as well. And for more exploration of the stories of failure, see this month's National Geographic magazine, or ngm.com, or the Nat Geo magazine app on your iPad. And you can explore some of the classic stories from long before any of us were even born. Ernest Shackleton and other amazing stories of seeming failure that became great stories in the history of exploration. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on Nat Geo on Google+. Thanks.
Bye-bye.